welcome to Firstpost Live, where we bring you the day's top 4 stories from across the world. I am Gushin Galen, live from the Firstpost studios. Let's begin with the headlines. Taiwan will not agree to making 50% of its semiconductors in the US, says its lead tariff negotiator. This as Washington pressures Taipei to produce more chips on US soil. Around 91 people are believed to be still trapped under the rubble after the collapse of a school building in Indonesia's East Java on Monday. Desperate parents demand rescuers speed up efforts. Germany police temporarily closes Oktoberfest grounds in Munich hours after a fire and explosions rocked a building where explosive devices were found. Greece grinds to a halt in a 24-hour general strike against plans by the Conservative government to introduce a 13-hour workday. Train and ferry services in Athens disrupted. And Yannick Sinner wins the 21st title of his career by thrashing American teenager Lerner Tian in the China Open. The Italian world number 2 lifts the trophy for the second time in Beijing. Hello and welcome. Today we begin with the Philippines. The nation is mourning after a powerful 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck late on September 30, leaving devastation in its wake. By October 1, the death toll has climbed close to 70, with hospitals in Cebu province struggling to cope with the flood of injured survivors and rescuers still pulling bodies from the collapsed buildings. The 6.9 magnitude quake, described by the US Geological Survey as shallow and therefore more destructive, struck off the northern end of Cebu Island near Bogo. It is a city of at least 90,000 residents, and what followed was a night of chaos, fear and desperate rescue efforts as the ground continued to tremble, with at least 379 aftershocks.
There are many patients already. We are already overwhelmed, so we have to bring them to the city.
The earthquake left visible scars across the Central Islands. In Cebu province, a commercial building and a school in Bantayan collapsed. A centuries-old Catholic church on the island crumbled dramatically, with its light-adorned belfry toppling into the courtyard. Officials confirmed that the hardest-hit areas included Bogo, where at least 14 lives were lost, Medellin, where 12 deaths, and San Remigio, with 5 fatalities. Most of the victims died after being struck by collapsing walls and crumbling houses. In fact, in total, nearly 70 lives have been claimed, and authorities fear the toll could rise as rescue operations continue. On the other hand, at least 147 people also have sustained injuries across the affected provinces. Authorities fear the toll could rise as rescue operations continue.
We are prepared and we have the equipment needed for these kinds of emergencies. Our people are equipped with the training and specialties that we will use in these types of situations.
Apart from the fatalities, the quake also knocked out electricity across Cebu and nearby islands after power lines tripped, plunging entire cities into darkness. Later, power was restored in Cebu and 4 other central islands by midnight, but sense of fear and uncertainty remained. Many residents, still shaken by the disaster, spent the night in the streets or open fields, terrified of returning to their homes as aftershocks rattled the ground. By dawn of October 1, rescue teams continued digging through debris, carrying out body bags even as families gathered nearby in grief. The Philippines, which is located on the Pacific Ring of Fire, is no stranger to earthquakes. But for the communities of Cebu, Bogo and surrounding islands, this quake has left a deep wound that will take years to heal. Moving on, let's turn our attention to Africa, where Gen Z protests have triggered chaos and unrest in Madagascar and Morocco. The protests began last week and have shown no sign of slowing down, despite heavy security presence and crackdown. Starting with Madagascar, fresh demonstrators broke out on Tuesday, which saw thousands of protesters taking to the streets in the capital, Antananarivo. Police fired tear gas and rubber bullets at the protesters' rally against repeated water and power cuts across the country. On Monday, President Antoena sacked his government in a bid to quell days of deadly unrest, which has reportedly killed at least 22 people and injured over 100 others so far. The president apologized for his inaction by the ministers and vowed to find a solution to the country's problems. However, it was not enough to end the protests. The angry young demonstrators have now called for the president's resignation. Upset by the government's indifference to their suffering, the protesters even chanted slogans demanding the president to quit and waved flags with a pirate skull from the Japanese anime One Piece, which has now become the symbol of the youth-led demonstrators.
This is not a solution. The evil has not been eradicated. Nothing will change. Andry Rajoelina must leave. We demand Andry Rajoelina's resignation. He has been in power for 16 years, but nothing has changed. The living conditions of the Malagasy people are deteriorating and getting worse every day. Our future is getting darker.
The widespread protests in Madagascar are inspired by the Gen Z protests in Indonesia and Nepal. Such protests have also hit Kenya and Nigeria previously. These Gen Z protests were publicized on social media, which prompted thousands of youngsters to take to the streets and express their discontent. Now moving on to Morocco, where violence clashes erupted on Tuesday after days of protests calling for reforms in the public health and education sectors. Young protesters clashed with security forces across several Moroccan cities, including the capital Rabat, where police arrested dozens of young people as they attempted to begin chanting slogans. As per media reports, in the southern cities of Tiznit, Esnegan and Ait Amira, as well as the eastern city of Oujda and Temara near the capital Rabat, hundreds of protesters hurled stones at security forces, attempting to disperse the gatherings. These youth-led protests were organized online by a group named Gen Z 212, though its founder remains unknown. Angry protesters have slammed the government for pouring money into international sporting events like the 2030 FIFA World Cup while neglecting health and education. In the run-up to the 2030 FIFA World Cup, Morocco is building at least 3 new stadiums and renovating or expanding at least half a dozen others. In fact, the North African nation is also set to host the Africa Cup of Nations later this year. In Morocco, the public discontent has been on the rise over social inequalities, which have disproportionately affected young people and women. Recent reports of the deaths of 8 pregnant women at a public hospital in Agadir have further fueled public outrage. As Gen Z protests continue in Madagascar and Morocco, it highlights a broader trend of how youth-led demonstrators are gaining momentum in Africa. Now let's shift focus to West Asia. A Dutch cargo ship came under a massive attack in the Gulf of Aden. Iran-backed Houthi rebels claimed responsibility for the attack. The Yemen-based group said they struck the ship with a cruise missile on September 30th as it was headed to Palestinian territories under Israel's control. At least 2 crew members were injured in the fire sparked by missile explosion. Aerial footage showed the damaged vessel, its crew being airlifted by helicopter to safety. EU naval forces, part of Operation Aspides, led the rescue, and at least 19 crew members were evacuated in a mission that officials say prevented an even bigger maritime disaster. The Amsterdam-based operator confirmed the ship was in international waters when it was hit. The company reported substantial damage to the vessel. In fact, in a televised statement, Houthi military spokesperson said the Dutch ship was targeted for violating what the group calls an entry ban on Israeli ports amid raging war in Gaza. Listen in.
The naval force of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a military operation targeting the ship owing to the violation of the entry ban to the ports of occupied Palestine by the company that owns the ship. The targeting operation took place in the Gulf of Aden with a cruise missile. The operation resulted in a direct hit on the ship, which caught fire and is now at risk of sinking.
The Iran-backed group has escalated attacks on commercial shipping since 2023, claiming to act in solidarity with Palestinians during the war in Gaza. Data from maritime security monitors shows the Houthis have attacked or harassed over 100 ships in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden over the past 2 years. In July, they sank 2 vessels, the Magic Seas and the Eternity Sea, killing several crew members. The group's action rattled one of the world's most vital trade routes that carried over $1 trillion in goods each year before the Israel-Gaza war. Meanwhile, Israel, for its part, has retaliated with strikes inside Yemen. Just last week, airstrikes on the Yemeni capital Sana'a killed at least 9 people a day after a Houthi drone reached southern Israel. The attack on the Dutch vessel marks the first in the Gulf of Aden since August, expanding the zone of risk for global shipping. The US and the EU naval patrols remain on alert, with search and rescue teams ready in case of further strikes. But with no signs, the Houthis are backing down and Israeli strikes continuing in response. The Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea remain among the world's most volatile shipping routes. Today we end in Washington. The US government has officially shut down for the first time in nearly 7 years. This comes after a deeply divided Congress failed to reach any agreement on funding, leaving the government without the money it needs to operate and create widespread uncertainty about what comes next. President Trump, who had insisted just hours before the midnight deadline that no one wanted the government to shut down, was unable to broker a deal between Democrats and Republicans despite multiple meetings with congressional leaders.
They are shutting it down. We're not shutting it down. We don't want it to shut down because we have the greatest period of time ever. I told you, we have $17 trillion being invested. So the last person that wants it shut down is us now. With that being said, we can do things during the shutdown that are irreversible, that are bad for them and irreversible by them, like cutting vast numbers of people out, cutting things that they like, cutting programs that they like.
At the heart of this fight are deep disagreements over healthcare, with Democrats demanding extensions to subsidies and tax credits that they argue are crucial for millions of Americans facing rising insurance premiums. Democrats pushed for a spending bill that included an extension of healthcare subsidies under the Affordable Care Act and a reversal of earlier Medicaid cuts.
We're ready, we're willing and able to find a bipartisan path forward to fund the government in a way that actually meets the needs of the American people in terms of their health, their safety, and their economic well-being. But here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues to gut the health care of the American people. Not now, not ever.
Meanwhile, Republicans introduced a short-term stopgap measure that would have kept the government running for 7 weeks. But both bills failed to pass, leaving the government without a lifeline. The Republicans flatly refused to reopen the debate on Medicaid cuts and have encouraged the president to stay away from compromise.
House has passed a clean, nonpartisan, continuing resolution to fund the government until November the 21st. The president is ready to sign it. But Senate Democrats, they're standing in the way.
Now, as soon as the shutdown became official, the blame game began. Democrats accused Republicans of failing to govern, with former Vice President Kamala Harris stating that Republicans who control the White House, the House, and the Senate bear full responsibility. Democratic Senator Christy Gillibrand urged Republicans to come to the table and put American families before billionaires. At the same time, Republicans turned the finger back on Democrats, with Speaker Mike Johnson posting that Democrats had, in his words, voted to close the government. This marks the 21st shutdown since 1977, but unlike some earlier shutdowns that lasted only a day or two, this one could prove far more disruptive, since no signs of compromise are emerging. During the last shutdown in late 2018, which lasted a record 35 days, many federal workers turned to food banks. Some called in sick because they could not afford childcare or gasoline, and essential services suffered heavily. Hence, with this new shutdown, as many as 750,000 federal workers face furloughs. Essential workers such as airport security staff, air traffic controllers, ICE agents, and even troops deployed to US cities will remain on duty without a paycheck. The economic fallout of a prolonged shutdown could ripple nationwide, with households struggling, services halted, and political divisions hardening further. And as markets brace for impact and millions of Americans wonder how long they will go without pay, the question that now looms over Washington is how much damage the shutdown will leave behind before anyone dares to strike a deal. That's all for today. Thank you for joining us. I am Gushin Garland, and we'll see you right back here at the same time. Until then, stay informed and stay tuned to Firstpost.